Hey, how's it going? So I'm going to cut straight to it. I got this DSLR camera streaming setup for about $250 US, and I think you can actually get it for a little bit cheaper. If you want to hear how I did it, stick around to find out. Alright, so let's really quickly go over why you might want to go this route. There are three main reasons that you're going to want to use a DSLR over a webcam to stream out to Twitch. One of the main reasons is control. There's a lot more control in lighting and color and what your focus that you can get from this type of setup. You just have a lot more options to make it look how you want when you go with this kind of camera. The second is just overall image quality. Because you have more control and because the sensor is obviously going to be a lot better in a camera like this, in a DSLR, over a webcam that is about the size of your thumb, you can just get a better image quality out of it. And the third is going to be the bokeh. Bokeh is the effect that having a lens that focuses within a particular range gives you items that are out of focus being blurry, and when they're in focus, obviously they are sharp, like me and my face, versus the background right now. It just gives you that feeling of separation of your subject, like a portrait photo of the subject from their background. It's what a lot of smartphones are faking nowadays with software, but when you just have a real lens on a DSLR camera, it's just that authentic effect of it being focused on the subject this far away. Those three things sound good to you. You would like to pay $250 about for a DSLR camera to stream to Twitch. What do you need? How do you get started with this? There are really 5 things that you need to get this setup going. Those 5 things being the camera body, the lens, the HDMI cable, the HDMI to USB adapter or capture card, a la an Elgato Cam Link, and I think this is necessary 5th piece, a battery replacement that is essentially just a cable that goes to a wall outlet charger. Some people will just use the regular batteries that they come with. They'll have one on the charger, it'll last enough hours for the stream, they'll swap it out, but it's better to just get a battery replacement that can always power the camera so you don't have to worry about charging the camera. So how did I do this? How did I get all of these components, which can be marked up a decent bit right now because of the times that we're in, for only $250? I'll go over that piece by piece, starting with the camera body. And the camera body I went with is the Canon Rebel T1i. It's also known as the Canon 500D outside the US. I don't know why it is the Rebel T1i here and the 500D outside of the US. That's just the naming convention that Canon's went with for these cameras. The first reason I chose this body is because you can find it for cheap. I got this one on eBay for $105 shipped to me. The overall quality of the camera that I got off of eBay is pretty good. The body itself has some dings and little marks on it because the person who was selling it said they took it hiking a lot, and so it might have hit a few rocks on occasion. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the image quality. There are a couple of colorful little hot spots here that I assume are from some damage to the mirrors or the sensor inside the camera, but when you're streaming, the camera is shrunk down much smaller than this, and you can't really tell. The second reason I chose this camera is it's older, it's cheap, but it still has an HDMI port, which means I can capture the image from the camera with an HDMI cable going into the capture card and into my computer and into OBS. The third reason is that you can get a clean HDMI out signal from the camera. What I mean by clean is there's no user interface and HUD elements here. Now I'm actually only able to do that because I've installed a third-party, an open source firmware called Magic Lantern, and there are settings to remove all HUD elements while you're monitoring the camera through an HDMI, and you can also turn off the auto off feature that's on a lot of Canon cameras and other cameras in those Magic Lantern settings. And that is really what makes this camera usable for this purpose. Otherwise, there'd be a bunch of user interface here that no one wants to look at when you're streaming. And actually, the fourth reason that I chose this camera is because Canon makes reliable cameras and a lot of people use them. So I knew I could get something that, even though it's old, still works well. And if I had any questions about, I can do some research and find resources online to answer those questions that I have. So the second thing you're going to need that I mentioned earlier is a lens. The lens I've purchased here is a Canon lens. It is an EFS 24mm with an aperture of 2.8. So the first reason I picked this lens is because it's cheap. You can find it for about 60 to 80 bucks on eBay, and there are many listings posting it about there. I've seen a few auctions end at around 100, so I think you could definitely get this lens for about $80 to $100 and stay within this budget. The second reason is that it's a 24mm lens, and this camera has a slightly cropped sensor, so it ends up looking kind of like a 35mm lens would look like on a full sensor that doesn't crop it. I would recommend you can look at photos or videos from people online regarding this 24mm lens on a slightly cropped sensor camera. That's what I did, but also you're seeing it. This is the full range and image that you can get from this camera. I have the camera about almost a full arm's width, a little bit over an arm's width away from me. That's what this kind of looks like. As I said before, I went with this lens because it's cheap. One of the reasons it's cheap is because it's only a 2.8 aperture, which means you can only get so much light into it. The wider the aperture is, the lower the number is. So what that means is if you get like something with a 0.8 aperture, it will open up more and let more light into the sensor. So you can have less light in the room, but you can get a brighter image without having to digitally brighten it up. And I think the 2.8 was a good balance between cost and light that I could get into the sensor. I have two LED panels lighting me from the front, and I have that one light back there. And you can see I have a little bit of noise back here in the room, but the ISO is set at 100. I am brightening the image a little bit in OBS, but it's decent for what the lighting situation that I have in here. I should also say, I'm not a camera expert. I just did a lot of research and Googling, asking friends who do film and editing and stuff like that, watching videos by Harris Heller to get a lot of the information that I found on will this lens look good on this camera streaming in a basement with this light setup. But what I'm trying to illustrate is essentially that you don't have to be an expert to get the camera to look decent to stream out to Twitch. You can get that nice bokeh effect, you can get good colors, and you can get decent sharpness and clarity from a relatively inexpensive setup. The third thing you're going to need is an HDMI cable that is compatible with the camera that will then turn into a regular HDMI cable at the other end. You can find them for about $10 to $15 on Amazon. If you just search the name of your camera HDMI cable on Amazon, it will show up. The fourth thing that can actually be pretty expensive, but I don't think you have to spend too much money on, is the capture card, or really what looks like an HDMI to USB dongle at this point. The Elgato Cam Link and other cam links by Elgato can run from, at normal price, $100 up to $200 because they're in such high demand right now, and Elgato is just the name that everybody knows for streaming equipment. The capture card that I got is some random Chinese brand that cost me about $23, and it does 1080p video and 60 FPS. There's also some standards that I'll include a picture of here somewhere over the screen. Those standards are important because when it's converting from HDMI to the USB, you want to make sure that the programs will recognize the signal coming from the camera. And the fifth thing, last but not least, is just this battery replacement that I had mentioned earlier. The one that I got was about $13. Again, just search the name of the camera body that you got, as well as battery replacement on Amazon, and you should be able to find one. Mine just plugs into a wall port, but you can find some that charge over USB. You can find a bunch of different versions of them. I got mine in about 2 days off Amazon. It was like 13 bucks. And that's it. For about 250 bucks, you can get those 5 pieces, which are all the components you need to connect together to get this kind of camera into OBS and out onto Twitch. So let's talk about some of the challenges and downsides going with this kind of setup. There are really 3 challenges with using this kind of older DSLR. The first being that there is not a naturally clean HDMI out. You do need to install Magic Lantern as a third-party software and mess with the configuration a little bit to get this clean signal with no user interface over it. The second thing being the fact that it wants to turn off every 30 minutes, and I also had to use the Magic Lantern software to say, no, stay on for hours on end, this is all fine. The third thing that maybe I should have mentioned before in the purchase requirements, but is not technically necessary to run this setup, is a fan, because the camera gets hot. After about an hour of use, I got heat warnings, and after about 3 hours of use, it turned itself off. What I ended up doing was pointing a little USB desk fan at the back of the camera. The fan ran me about $10, and now the camera stays within that running operating temperature. I haven't had problems with even 6 to 7 hour streams with the fan pointed at the back of the camera. It stays within that realm. But that's really it. Those 3 things are the only downsides that I found with this setup so far. Setting up the Magic Lantern software can be a little bit finicky, but honestly, if you're comfortable with doing a stream setup in OBS, I think that you could manage setting up the Magic Lantern software. And once you disable the auto off and clear the user interface elements in the settings, you don't have to do those again. I know the heat could be a bigger concern for some people, but I'm still comfortable recommending this setup because of the price, and I was able to remedy the heat situation seemingly in a very simple fashion. And that's it. I really do think for $250 this is a pretty good DSLR setup for Twitch. I think the image quality is good for how much money I spent, and you know, if we take a look at, this is a transition screen I use when I have the game up here. The camera's a lot smaller. You're shrinking the video to a size that I believe this image quality is good. And most of the time you're playing a game and you're about this large. And at this size, I think it's very hard to discern the difference between a DSLR that costed $100 and several $100s. I should also say, purchasing these things will not make your stream or camera look great. There are a lot of settings that you have to go through when setting up the camera, when setting up your lights, when outputting to Twitch, that you need to tweak and mess with to make sure that you're getting the best image quality that you can out of this investment. So buying all these things and slamming them together and getting them to work on a very basic level isn't automatically going to make them look great. I probably spent 3 hours messing around with lighting the other day. I spent probably 2 or 3 hours messing around with the setting on the camera for a couple of days here and there. It won't just work. So even if you buy all of these pieces and follow this kind of purchasing plan that I've laid out for you, buying a webcam still is a lot easier. And if you spent $50 on lighting and mess with that for a while, you might get that to the place where you want to be. But if you think that this DSLR thing is where you want to go, I think I can recommend this setup pretty wholeheartedly. Alright, that's it. If you like this, do the thing with a thumb. You can subscribe and check out my next video, which will go over how to actually set all of this up to look decent, as I think this does. And you can go ahead and follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/BagelBrother. You can also find me on social media at TheBagelBrother, where I'll tweet when I go live on Twitch. Until next time, have a good one, everybody. Bye. Oh, he's standing up on his back legs. What the fuck? Why are you here? Will he break things?